Okay, now it's recording. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Today we have a very special talk. We have a talk about a subject that is clearly in the news. We have a talk about the founder of the most valued company in the world, Nvidia, which basically creates and sells the most strategic asset that we had in years, which are these GPU special chips that allow you to carry artificial intelligence, such as ChatGPT, as you all know. And it's a very special asset because I was thinking about it, and since the nuclear weapons, I don't think there has been such an important input in the military warfare. We're thinking so. It could be in a best moment. Donald Trump also nationalized part of the competitor of Nvidia. So it's great to know what this world is about, how it came around, how this key input exists, and who is behind it. So for that subject, we have Stephen Witt,
Hi.
who write a bio on, I don't know exactly how to say his name, but Jensen Huang.
Jensen Huang.
Jensen Huang,
Yeah,
who is
Huang.
the,
Although, yeah, his birth name is kind of Renshun
yeah.
Huang, but I can't speak Mandarin very well, or Chinese.
So who is the founder and the CEO of Nvidia, and that recently agreed also to give a little part of its revenue on the sales of chips to China with Donald
Yeah.
Trump. So he will tell us about it, him, and he's a writer. He has another book, if anyone is interested, about free music, how the music industry changed after the internet, and he also writes pieces for the New York Times, Financial Times, and other worldwide known newspapers. And we also have Rafael, who is a PhD from Minnesota in economics, and he also was the president of the Comisión Nacional para la Productividad, si no estoy equivocado, was part of the idea of how do we grow. And I think the story of Nvidia is also a story about like a certain ecosystem that existed, and he can tell us about it and how we should care about these geniuses. Okay, so Stephen will present his book for about 30 minutes, and then Rafael will make some comments for about 10 minutes, and we'll open the floor for questions, okay? So thank you, everyone. Welcome, and you can go ahead, Stephen. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's really fantastic to contact people all over the world in this way. Um, so I was just actually touring a giant data center here in the United States, and this is a giant warehouse full of these servers in closets. And you open the closet, and it's like a jet engine is inside of it. It's blasting you in the face with air. And all that air, all that power, all that cooling system is going to power these Nvidia microchips, which do, trillions or zillions of calculations every second, trying to advance the state of AI. So what happens is a customer wants their AI to get better. They start from one checkpoint. They commission this building full of computers to process all of this information on NVIDIA's special processors. And at the end of, say, a few days or a week or sometimes even a month, they come back and they hit the next checkpoint and the AI has improved. This has become the engine of the global economy. This action, okay? And NVIDIA makes the most critical component, which is the microchip. One of these closets, the computing equipment inside of it, NVIDIA sells it for about $3 million. And they're building hundreds of thousands and millions of these closets. It's a $1 trillion plus investment cycle. You compared it maybe to nuclear weapons, but the scale of the infrastructure buildout, I would almost say it's like the invention of the railroad in the 1880s. This has become one of the largest deployments of capital of all time. And we see that reflected in NVIDIA's stock price. It's now the single most valuable company in the world. And so much is happening so quickly, even since I wrote this book. It came out in April. As Bernardo mentioned, Trump has gotten involved. That's created a very chaotic situation. Jensen has had to sort of manage Trump's ego, I think. And he's surprisingly good at that because Jensen's a very capable individual, as we'll get into. But that's the state of where we are right now. The world's most valuable, largest company, the most single successful executive of our era, and the man who's powering the new industrial revolution. So how did we get here? And I think I'll share the screen to get started here. Okay, so you'll excuse maybe the Chinese title. The last time I gave this talk was in China. So this is the Chinese edition of the book, but presumably you're reading a different edition. But what I learned from Jensen and Nvidia. So I was granted unprecedented access inside Nvidia to write this book. I interviewed Jensen more than anyone else, 6 times, and I talked to many of his top executives, including like all of the kind of heads of the company, plus a ton of customers, competitors, former employees, and analysts. And I'll use this talk to answer the 2 most common questions that I get, which are, how did Nvidia become the most valuable company in the world? And then the second question is, how can I personally be more like Jensen Huang so I can succeed and conquer the planet? So Nvidia's success is due to the unexpected harmony of 2 failed technologies. And this is just an unbelievable story. On the software side, you had something called a neural network. And what the neural network did was it was basically software patterned after the human brain. Just like our brain, it has neurons, and it has connections between those neurons. In English, we call them synapses. But in the neural net, they're called weights. So that final output of the neural net is really just a list of numbers that represents how much those weights are, how much one neuron affects the other, the degree of intensity of the synaptic connection. Now, people have been experimenting with neural nets since the 1950s. I mean, maybe even since the 1940s. And no one had ever been able to get them to work at scale. In fact, this technology was abandoned and left for dead. Very few people in the world were working on it. And those who did continue to work on it were viewed as extremely eccentric, and the technology was viewed as very unlikely to succeed. Simultaneously, on the hardware side, you had a group of innovators who wanted to do what was called parallel or accelerated computing. Now, the way an Intel CPU classically worked was you took one math problem at a time and gave it to the processor. There's another paradigm where you split the microchip, and I think you can see it here on the left, into many different smaller zones of computing. And for certain kinds of problems, you can break them up and do hundreds of calculations at the same time. Now, this is demonstrably a faster way to do it, but it is much harder to program. And because CPUs were speeding up every year, Moore's law, they doubled in capacity every 18 months or so. Nobody bothered to learn this parallel computing technology. In fact, a number of parallel computing companies similar to Nvidia had started in the 80s and 90s, and all of them had failed. They all went out of business. So working in either of these fields, either the software side, neural networks, or the parallel computing side, was considered career suicide. If you were interested in neural networks, if you were interested in parallel computing, basically you were going to be a professor somewhere. You were never going to touch industry, and you were going to be like a weird eccentric working off in some failed field. That's how most people viewed this. Now, Nvidia had made parallel computing work. One thing they had noticed was for certain applications, especially video games, okay, you could have to render lots of 3D kind of scenes very quickly, and that was well suited to parallel computing. And they made a bet that they could convince the video game programmers to learn this technology and to learn this parallel computing technology. And they were able to make it succeed in this very small niche market. And this actually made them valuable, and they were added to the S&P 500 in 2001. Then they continued to push parallel computing to new fields. They said, maybe the stuff that we're doing on the GPU for graphics processing, maybe we can make that useful to scientists. And they pursued customers like solid-state physicists and chemists, oil prospectors, weather forecasting. And they got really very few customers. Nobody liked this idea because parallel computing had never worked. When Nvidia started this around 2001 or so, when people first started using the GPU as a scientific computing application, Nvidia was added to the S&P 500, as I said. After 13 years, or 11 years, that is, of pursuing this particular business strategy, Nvidia's stock price had gone nowhere, as you can see in the chart. And in fact, in 2012, investors were so angry with Jensen that a group of corporate raiders arrived and basically were threatening to have him fired. That was not so long ago. And Jensen, this company started in 93, 2012. So at this point, Jensen has been the CEO of Nvidia for 20 years, and he has not found his killer app. I mean, the computer graphics world is marginally profitable, but there's a lot of pain and it's really tough. And Jensen starts to tell his employees, the pain and suffering of everything we do is great. If you're working at this company and you're not suffering, come see me. And he even gets a tattoo, as you can see, of the company logo. Now, what happened? So Nvidia has this platform that they've built, this scientific computing platform. And what can happen is you can actually go to buy a GPU at the store, like at a gaming store, and then you can kind of flick a switch on it and turn it into a low budget supercomputer, right? So who is this for? Who's the customer here? Well, it's not like mainstream scientists, right? Because mainstream scientists are well funded and they can afford time on a real supercomputer. If you're building kind of a low budget, jerry rigged supercomputer, then that is for like a mad scientist, right? A scientist whose research is so marginal that they can't actually afford any funding. And that was the state of neural nets in 2012. These three guys, Ilya Sutskever, Jeffrey Hinton, and Alex Krzyzewski, they invented the modern neural net paradigm. Everything that's happening in AI can be traced back to their work. And what they did is they took a new neural net, and for the first time, they combined it with two NVIDIA gaming GPUs. So this is like an $800 rig, maybe $800 computer. And they ran it for about a week. And at the end, they produced a neural network that was better at image recognition than any computer had ever been before. And not only that, it was 10% better, which was an enormous leap. So to me, this is like the Wright brothers getting the airplane off the ground for the first time. Okay. This now is widely considered one of the most important computer science findings ever. It's probably one of the most important findings in any kind of science. And the innovation here is not that the neural net exists, but how fast the neural net runs on NVIDIA hardware. That was the key finding. That when you used parallel computing and you accelerated the development of this neural net software by 1,000 times or even 1,000,000 times, you got extraordinary results. That came as a big surprise to Hinton's group. It also came as a huge surprise to NVIDIA. You know, Jensen was out there marketing the supercomputing technology, and AI was not considered to be one of his use cases. I mean, they would have presentations at NVIDIA where they would list like 25 different things that a GPU could be used for. And as I said, it was stuff like physics simulations, weather forecasting. AI was not on that list. This came as a huge surprise to NVIDIA. And in fact, they had no AI staff at the time that this paper came out. So big surprise. Are we all following? I just want to check in. Everything okay? Okay.
Yeah, great. Everything okay.
Okay. So in 2014, so Jensen holds this technology conference every year to promote the use of GPUs. In 2013, I watched the conference. Jensen did not mention AI one time. It wasn't what he was trying to promote. Sometime between early 2013 and early 2014, Jensen learned about neural networks and AI. And he got it instantly. Now remember, this is not the present day. This is 2013. And he's just looking at basically a handful of promising scientific results. But he sends a company-wide email saying, we are now an AI company exclusively, or not exclusively, but first. We're pivoting from graphics to AI. From now on, we are going to build dedicated AI hardware that speeds up the work that Hinton and his group are doing faster and faster. Meanwhile, Hinton and his group, Sutskever and Krzyzewski, they get bought by Google. And so they move to Silicon Valley. And now at this time, Google has this giant constellation of data centers, like probably the largest single collection of computers in the world at the time. But they're all running on Intel CPUs. And these three mavericks show up and they disconnect their computers from this giant private supercomputer and start running hardware on gaming chips in a closet. And they get extraordinary results. Google sees this and they say, oh my God, these GPUs are incredible. And they place the first bulk order for GPUs, $100 million worth of NVIDIA equipment, which at the time was by far the single largest purchase order ever made from NVIDIA. Now, today, they're buying $100 billion worth of NVIDIA equipment. So it just accelerated like crazy. So from that 2014 email, here's the history of NVIDIA's stock price. You can see everything that came before is almost meaningless. And you see the rapid exponential growth right at the end there. At this time, NVIDIA becomes the primary hardware supplier for AI with the 90% market share. Also at this time, around 2014, Jensen kind of leans into this iconic image and he buys a leather jacket and starts wearing it everywhere. So he sort of embraces this idea that he's going to be this kind of, he's going to replace Steve Jobs maybe as this kind of visionary tech figure. So what can we learn from Jensen? I'm sorry, the font here is a little hard to read, but I'll go along with it. Well, we have this thing called the $0 billion market. And this was Jensen's, really his key insight. And it's counterintuitive, but basically what it means is rather than pursuing the biggest customers, you actually pursue very small customers, customers who are not profitable initially to pursue, low margin customers like scientists. And you give them the tools to grow. And what you're hoping is that a whole new platform or paradigm will form around your technology. And this is, in fact, exactly what happened. But it took 10 or 11 years, and it made investors very angry. Jensen multiple times very nearly lost his job. And with one wrong turn, I think the world is a totally different place. Truly, he is a pivotal figure in history because nobody else was doing anything like this. Nobody at AMD, nobody at Intel. They just weren't building systems that looked anything like this. And it was kind of his vision, his foresight, but also his stubbornness that kind of made NVIDIA a success. Bill Dolly, who's formerly the chairman of the computer science department at Stanford, now works at NVIDIA. He said to me, without Jensen, I think we'd be about 10 years behind in technology. And I think that's right. Another principle that Jensen uses a lot is a scheduling principle called speed of light. These are more sort of like business principles, but I'll go in it real quickly. Basically, what it means is you identify the fastest something could be done, and then you work backwards to what seems like a reasonable approach to get it finished on time. And this is how NVIDIA, one of their secrets is they ship new products with like the precision of almost like a metronome. I mean, every 6 months, they're distributing something new. And it's because they use these planning things. And this is, third thing is really Jensen's secret. It's just what we used to call in the US critical thinking, critical reasoning, right? He works from first principles. He's completely open to any kind of idea. He examines the data and then he reaches his own conclusions. And his secret is once he reaches his own conclusion, he's not going to budge until the data tells him different, even if the market doesn't agree. So he's really very stubborn and he pursues his own ideas and thinking in his own way. He trusts his own reasoning, but he doesn't fool himself either. And lastly, this is what Jensen called OIALO, an acronym in English, which means a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And this is what Jensen saw with AI. Jensen has beautiful handwriting, and he'll build these beautiful diagrams on a whiteboard of like what NVIDIA is doing and where their product roadmap is going and what their calendar release schedule looks like. And when AI came along, he wiped everything off the whiteboard and just wrote that OIALO, once in a lifetime opportunity. And if you see one of these in your life, you have to kind of pursue it. So what can we not learn from Jensen, or what's difficult to imitate about Jensen? Now, I say this, but maybe some of you have these qualities. There's a picture of Jensen when he's 15 years old playing table tennis. Jensen started playing table tennis, and within 3 months, he was nationally ranked. He absorbs new information and learns things at a superhuman rate. He can pick up a new topic that he's never studied before and within 6 months be close to expert level. Like if we all started playing the guitar today, none of us had ever played the guitar before. And within 6 months, Jensen would be the best at the guitar out of all of this. His learning curve is just faster. Not only that, and this is related to point one, he works insanely hard. I mean, he basically works 90 hours a week, every week for over 40 continuous years. I worked this hard while I was writing this book, and by the end, I was completely burned out. So the ability to work this hard for many years on end is really extraordinary. Also, Jensen got lucky. You know, he would admit this. If AI didn't come along, it's quite possible he might have lost his job. It came along at just the right time. It came along just as the corporate raiders were taking a stake in his company. So he really got lucky in that sense. And multiple times in Nvidia's early years, they almost went bankrupt. They would have all sorts of manufacturing problems. They shipped bad products sometimes. I mean, there were times when it was 50-50 if Nvidia was going to be surviving in 3 months, if the lights were going to be on. And lastly, everyone I spoke to in Jensen's life, including the people who knew him from a long time ago when he was just a boarding student in Kentucky, felt that he was destined for greatness. Like his childhood friend, I talked to him and I was like, "Are you surprised that Jensen has become this, successful and powerful?" And his friend was like, "No, not at all. I always knew he was special." This guy knew him when he was 10 years old. I always knew he was special and different, and he had a special, different star quality about him. I always knew he would succeed. So I thought that was interesting. We're going to skip that one. These are more kind of China specific. Lastly, let's talk about where we are with AI right now. So since I published this book, and a tremendous amount of stuff has happened, but probably the most important thing that has happened is that while I was writing this book, okay, Jensen got on a conference call and he said, "We're at the beginning of a $1 trillion infrastructure cycle. We're at the beginning of a new industrial revolution." And the next day, Nvidia stock went up more than any stock had ever gone up before in the history of stocks. It had the single largest dollar value move. It was like, like a stock market crash sometimes? This was like that, but in the opposite direction. It was just unbelievable. And very soon, Nvidia claimed the title of the world's most valuable company, which it still holds. How do they maintain that lead? Where are they going to go from here, right? They're a $4 trillion company. How do they add another $4 trillion in market capitalization? Well, the fact that Jensen sells all of the equipment in those closets that we're training AI on, that he's the dominant supplier, that he has a monopoly, that's priced into the stock already. So to grow, Nvidia needs to find a new $0 million market and grow a new platform around a new idea. And for Jensen, I think what that idea is robotics. Jensen believes, and I think a lot of executives believe, that there's a wave of automation coming over the next decade or so, that we're going to have all sorts of robots everywhere, in our homes, attending to us, in public, and especially in factories. Now, to behave correctly, these robots need neural networks inside of them. They need brains, right? This is the hardest part, actually, of building the robot. It's not the physical robot itself. It's getting the brain of the robot to behave in the correct way. So, as a test case, let's say we want to train a robot to wash dishes using current AI techniques. We kind of have two choices. One, we can put a robot at the sink and have it wash dishes. And over the course of 10 million dishwashing cycles, maybe it'll get better at it. But it's going to break a ton of dishes. It's going to be incredibly cumbersome, expensive, and a huge mess. What Jensen wants to do, and this product is called Omniverse, is build a virtual reality digital simulation of physics of our world, a digital simulation of our world. And then let the robot learn to wash dishes in there, right? Create a virtual sink with virtual soap and virtual water and virtual dishes. And then it can break 10 trillion dishes. Who cares? Now, this is hard to do because you need really high fidelity physics simulation, almost at the level of almost at like the molecular level, right? You need to capture how the soap interacts with the dish, how the dish interacts with the water and the soap, the elasticity of the dish. Robots, when we drive cars, it's relatively easy because the whole point is the car shouldn't ever touch anything. Robots, when we're washing dishes, they have to touch the dish, right? So how are they going to do that well? So this is a cumbersome and an expensive task, but if you do it well enough, you can create the dominant platform for training robot brains. Phase 2 of this is, okay, now, today, when we use AI, typically our computer does not do very much of the processing. If I make a request of ChatGPT, it's taken on a data pipe data center AI factory somewhere. The request is processed and then it's delivered back to me. But for a robot, we can't do that, right? Because the lag is too long. It's just like a car. If we have a robot driving the car, it can't go to the data center and ask questions. It can't use connectivity. It has to make decisions in real time, in the moment. And this is called edge computing, as opposed to cloud computing. So what Jensen hopes to do is train the brains of the robots in his digital gymnasium, and then sell the brains, the chips that actually run the brain that he produced, to the robot manufacturers. And if he captures both sides of this market, maybe, it's crazy, right? But maybe Nvidia can add another $4 trillion in market cap. Okay, so that's kind of the basic spiel. There's plenty of more information and detail in the book. I hope you read it. I hope you enjoy it. But I'll turn the floor over to Rafael for his comments.
Thank you, Stephen. I must add that the book will be soon in the library of the university if you want to check it out.
Is there Spanish? Is there a Spanish language edition or English, or which one?
No, I don't think so. No.
Students here talk perfectly both languages.
What's that?
Students here talk perfect English, so don't worry.
Okay, great.
Rafael?
Okay, well, thank you, Bernardo. I really had a great time reading Stephen's book. I have it here. You see it? Yes. Right there. And I'm absolutely sure. I really believe that the positive reviews you have received, Steve, are fully deserved. I really had a good time. So I go with you when I say you should read the book. You're going to have a good time. And I think especially when you read them as a student in a business school, you're going to have have the opportunity to think about a lot of important issues that hopefully are going to have something to do with the future.
It's honestly just the story.
Sure.
I got lucky. You wouldn't think writing about a technology company, especially hardware, that it would be so interesting. But the story is just fascinating. So I got lucky in that regard.
Absolutely. So let me do the following. I'm going to just talk for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 minutes at most, so that we can then, I'm going to try to motivate, complementing what you were saying. I'm going to raise issues that for sure, at this point, I'm sure you have heard them several times, but I think are important in terms of the reflection that may allow us to discuss about important global issues when we think about Huang, about Nvidia, about this market, right? And this technology and so on. And let me do that. I was saying, complimenting you in the sense that I want to do it thinking that I'm an economist, and I'm an economist that is concerned with public policy. I'm somebody who teaches in a business school, and I live in an emerging country, okay? So those are my shoes, and from there I'm going to try to make a few, as I said, nothing very original. These issues are being raised several times, but I want to motivate the conversation we're going to have when Bernardo opens the floor. Is that fair? Yeah, I think so. Okay, so let me start saying something that is very obvious at this point, but still, and it's that Nvidia is not, I'm teaching microeconomics now, the introduction to microeconomics, okay? So we start with the perfect competitive model. That's the textbook board when we start to discuss economics. And Nvidia has not much to do with this traditional firm operating in this textbook environment, right? It's far from it. I don't know, I'm thinking about some of the numbers that you were saying, some of the figures you were mentioning. If I analyze this in the context of Chile, I was looking at the market capitalization of Nvidia today, and it's about 15 times our GDP. So now I'm comparing apples and pears, because one is a stock, is the value of Chile, whatever that is. The other one is the floor, right? Is the market share, and the other one is the floor, which is the GDP of Chile. But still, so the value in the market today of this company is 15 times our GDP. The second thing is that this is a company that is controlling, I went through the numbers yesterday, from what I found, is roughly 92% of the global GPU market today. And I know it has several branches there, but I mean, if you put everything together, all of them are above 90, 91, 94, and so on. So overall, they have 92% of the global GPU market. And this is what really impressed me when you think about this company, especially when you think about the past and the future. And when you think about a company of this size in terms of market value, and after a short life, but very successful, and then you think about the future, you think as an economist in terms of convergence, right? I mean, it's not easy for China to keep growing 15% per year as they did in 1981. Well, what is the, I mean, this is a question for everybody. What is the profit forecast for the next quarter? I mean, I went through some investment banking companies. Huh? They may be wrong, but still, they're forecasting 56% increase during the third quarter in profits. 56%, okay, in one. So that's just, I mean, as you were saying before, these three things together had never happened before, right? So it's hard to look at history and trying to use that to understand the future when you talk about these kind of things. And I'm thinking, again, from the perspective of an economist who's teaching in a business school, I'm thinking in terms of public policy. Now, I'm sure that when you talk to Wang, this is a person that is running a company with this characteristic. Of course, he's worried about much more than the quarterly earnings, right, or market share at this stage. So I want to raise the kind of issues that are in the discussion today in order to try to motivate the conversation, thinking about these broader concerns that we may have within the context of what is happening today in this world. The first one is very obvious, which is geopolitics. I'm a liberal in the classical sense, so I'm always concerned with concentration of power. That's the definition of a liberal, among other things. And when that concentration brings together both economic and political dimensions, that's a warning, right? Signal for everyone. And Nvidia today is not just an innovation firm, a very innovative firm, but it's a strategic actor, right? In a global fight over technology, trade, security, and so on, right? So that raises a lot of questions that go far beyond one company's bottom line, okay? So maybe we can talk a little bit about that later. The second concern that I want to raise, which kind of surprised me when I was going through your book, is training. And I may be wrong, but we can talk about that later. Or you can tell us what you think about this. For Nvidia's products to sustain their economic importance, it is not enough to keep innovating, right, and create something that the market values. There must also be a broad and lasting demand for those products, right? You were talking a little bit about that. And that requires, and this is the point that I want to raise, I think a massive population that is able to use and benefit from them, right? But not as outsider, passive consumers who just use something without understanding what happened with it. I'm thinking about, for example, the need for having a massive population. I'm thinking about the 8 billion people, not the smart engineers or the brilliant guys who are working with these complicated things. I'm thinking about everybody. As normal human beings across every country, every sector, every firm, we need to be able to use this technology in order to maintain that demand for this product and for Nvidia to keep increasing, right? And that, because I'm thinking that, again, from Chile, should Chile think about itself trying to get involved in this war for creating technologies that we're not creating somewhere else? I don't think so. We're an emerging country. That is going to happen first in Silicon Valley, MIT, Harvard, or somewhere else. But the priority of this kind of technological changes, innovations happening in our country is low. Still, what is our challenge? And I was reading an article by the Prime Minister of the UK 3 or 4 weeks ago in the Economist. He was saying, you guys in the emerging world have a huge challenge. You must train your population so that everybody knows how to use these technologies. So, I mean, everybody, no matter how important you are in the company, you're at the top, you're at the bottom in terms of the importance of what you do for the long term. Still, you need to use AI in order to work better.
Right.
And so I was surprised that when you talk to him, he didn't mention as an important thing the challenge of training the world population. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't know if I made myself clear in terms of I think that at some point when you have this size and you have this importance and you pretend to keep being so important in the future, you need to make sure that everybody feels close enough to your technology and to whatever is being used with what you're designing and innovating in order to keep doing that, right? We need to make sure we have 8 billion people that need to use this and realize that they need to use this. And so the training part is something that I think should be on the table more than it is in terms of the challenge for the whole world.
I think, you know, the technology is so new that almost nobody knows how to use it is the thing. They're still discovering it. Remember, the creators of the neural nets often don't know exactly what they can do, right? They make the neural net and then they have to do a suite of evaluation tests that determine what the thing is actually capable
Absolutely, of. But I think that at the same time that you're putting so many hours in thinking about how to keep improving this and finding ways to use it in a positive way, and as a company to make more money in the right, I mean, being realistic, you can spend time also making sure that this is not something that is a foreign technology, in the sense of making sure that we feel comfortable enough using it everywhere, so that we really need you to keep existent. You know what I mean?
Well, what's happening in the US, at least, is the students are showing the professors how to use it. This is what's happening in the United States. So since the debut of ChatGPT in 2022, education has basically been completely upended, right? So the classic model of go read this for a semester, talk about it in class, and then come back and write a paper, that's broken. It's dead. You can't do it anymore because AI makes it too easy to cheat. And you can just regurgitate what you need to do. So they have to evolve the model. I think that's positive, honestly. But I talk to research academics and they are clueless. I mean, their students know more, right? Because this is a native digital technology for this. So I think just as in the very early stages of the internet, when it was not clear how it might be used, how it would be used, and often it was the younger people who had to show the older people what was possible. I believe that is happening now. And I believe that these systems are at least the chat bots, some of the more sophisticated tools, not so much, but the chat bots are very accessible. And in fact, they invite you to play with them. And this is how you learn to use them. There's not a course, as far as I know. I haven't seen one yet. I mean, probably now one exists, but in terms of how to prompt this, I'll tell you, I'm writing an article for the New York Times now about the kind of independent teams who come in and evaluate how dangerous the AIs are. So, for example, when GPT-5 comes out, when OpenAI produces a new product, before it's distributed to the product, they give it to these independent teams who try and jailbreak the AI and get it to produce, nasty stuff like hate literature, violent images, and stuff, to see if the filters work and to see how the AI actually works, to get an independent view of it. Everybody who works in that field is like 24 years old. They're so young. They look like children to me. They're so young. They're younger probably than many of your students, and they're the experts on it. So I think what is happening now is a process of discovery, especially in the chatbots, where we really learn what we can do, because the inventors don't actually know what these things can do, more so perhaps than almost any other invention before. Even the people who design it don't really know what it's capable of. It have to learn for themselves. And this is an emerging field. So I would say, rather than training per se, because I'm not sure we know how to do that yet, what we need to do is encourage widespread creative use of this technology, just as perhaps we encourage widespread creative use of, say, the World Wide Web in 1995 or 1996. That's where we are, or the internet. This is a technology, more so than many technologies, where simply interacting with it produces new knowledge, not just for you, but for the entire community that's kind of surrounding about it. It has that network effect as people learn to use it better and learn to grow and come up with all sorts of unexpected use cases, just as they did with the World Wide Web in the early days. I think that's where we are in an equivalent place. I do think this technology has the potential to cause the developed world to pull away from the developing world if we're not careful. That gap, AI, can actually make that gap longer rather than shorter. And I think that we do have to be very mindful and cognizant that everyone does have kind of access to it on equal footing. But I think if we do that, then I think we can begin to, and I mean, think about with languages already, how many language barriers have been broken down by Google Translate and similar kind of AI on demand technologies. I was in China, as you guys saw, lecturing, and they simultaneously translated what I was saying, and AI did it in real time behind me into English. So a lot of barriers that may have previously existed to global trade or interaction are going to fall, I think, very soon. And I think we're going to enter a different sort of world. But I hear you with regards to training. I think probably you're correct about that. I wanted to say one more thing in response to what you said too.
Go ahead. We can talk a little bit about regulation also, right? Because I mean, I want to finish with a question. I mean, which is a question I'm sure you have heard several times, but still. But I can do that after you make the comment you want to make. Yeah, please go ahead.
You mentioned the classic microeconomics of a firm and profits. Jensen understands that intimately. He understands the classic microeconomics. And the classic microeconomic model, the firm's profits will slowly be competed away to zero as new entrants enter the market. Jensen's entire life is running away from that model.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Like all smart businessmen, he understands that in a perfectly competitive ideal universe, he will not make any money, or he will not earn above his cost of capital in a continuous way. And so, like a lot of Silicon Valley executives, he's constantly fleeing that kind of ideal model. So that's the other point.
Right. No, that's just amazing. Well, the third issue is regulation, which is something I mean, you know this Nobel Prize winner from last year, Daron Acemoglu. Have you heard of, right? I mean, this is a classical mainstream economist, neoclassical economist, we call them. He's a Turkish guy, right? A Turkish guy, but he's a professor of economics in MIT. I mean, he has been there for 30 years and so. So he's a very market-oriented economist, as we all are when we went to the United States. And he's one of the economists who are working from academia in the US, who has been more vocal in terms of raising concerns about the implications of AI, right? He's concerned about the fact that, I mean, you know that we economists, when we look at technology and labor, the story for us is not so bad. I mean, for thousands of years, machines and workers were doing things together, right? In the in agriculture, the same thing for thousands of years. Then with the Industrial Revolution, things started to change with with machines and so on in textile and everything, and we started being afraid of losing our jobs and so on, right? But when you go through the data, at least the macro data, the data shows that the 20th century was the best century in the history of life in terms at least of economics, right? Even though, of course, we had a lot of reassignation of, in terms of sectors and companies and so on. But now, even Acemoglu, who is somebody who knows very well that those 100 years of, successful relationship between, at least in the aggregate, machines and workers, he's saying maybe this time is different, right? Because what is happening a lot, at least when we go through the data and we look in a very broad way to companies, what is happening is that all of them are basically using AI for automation, right? I mean, basically instead of having this complement, right, between machines and workers, what they're doing, they're just basically substituting workers for machines, right? And it's not hard to imagine that this keeps, working that way. What is going to happen is that we're going to have social unrest in the future. I mean, in the same way that you need to have a demand for your supply, no matter how good the supply is. That's what I was thinking when I talk about training. You need to make sure that people are willing to accept the machines, right? And they don't burn them, as they did in the early 19th century in the UK, right?
Look, industrialization caused a great deal of social unrest, right?
Absolutely.
Labor unrest, all sorts of
this time is different because it's too massive and it's too fast and it's too deep. We may not end up, I mean, we may end up with, not with, we don't want less machines in the future. What we want is more machines that help us to have a better life.
Right.
And to be more productive and so on, right? But the point is that if this social unrest is deep enough, we may end up with fewer machines. And that's not the equilibrium we're looking for, right?
Right.
So that discussion about regulation, I think, is, of course, is very important, is in, you know, and for the right reason.
You know, by definition, almost any time-saving technology, by definition, is going to cost someone their job.
Absolutely.
Right? By definition, if you have a time-saving technology, then that person who used to do that isn't going to have work anymore, right?
Right.
That doesn't mean time-saving technology is bad per se, and most of what's eliminated is probably not that interesting work in the past, at least. And this has led generally to a more productive and fruitful economy. But sometimes there's a cost. For example, I now buy, most of my books are delivered to me in ebook format on my phone. I don't go to the bookstore very much anymore. Yeah, I'm a writer. I mean, I read constantly, but I'm just not at the bookstore as much as I used to be. But there's a hidden cost there, which is I spend less time interacting with people who love books, right? Because the efficiency of what I've accomplished is to have it beamed directly to me. I lose the time that I'm milling around in the bookstore talking to people. And I don't think any economist would know how to account for that thing that is lost, even though it is a real loss, right? And so if hyper efficiency and having systems being delivered on command also often have hidden social costs. And I think we see this reflected broadly in society by plummeting birth rates, for example. We live in a highly prosperous time, right? We've cured a great number of diseases or addressed. We live longer than ever. We're very healthy. And yet nobody wants to reproduce. So why is that? That's kind of odd, right? You would think the opposite would be true. And so, you know, a number of hidden social costs are baked into making things more efficient. Perhaps we lose our social bonds as people as we create a more productive on-demand economy. AI threatens to even turbocharge that because as it gets better and better, it's going to go from being text to video avatars to just like interacting with a real person. And you'll just be interacting with machines constantly, and you won't even perceive that they're not human to some extent. And this will, at least in economic statistics, produce a great amount of valuable goods, right? It'll increase GDP, etc. But it may actually create this sense of social isolation and maybe even plummet the birth rate, might even go further down. So we may be automating or eliminating ourselves out of the picture. And in fact, this is the biggest threat of AI because it can kind of do anything a human can do in the end state, we think. And so what new jobs will be created when I have a machine that can literally do anything I can do, but better and faster? You know, do we all go to live theater performances? Is it, you know, probably a few fields are immune. Maybe we can go to clown school. We can be clowns. We can, probably like kindergarten teachers, early childhood education. But it's hard to think of too many jobs that absolutely require the most direct human touch to be as efficient as possible. So I wonder if AI arrives, if we don't start to reorient ourselves or our society into, I almost would call it planned inefficiency or deliberate inefficiency. And I see some evidence of this in music, right? So my last book was about the MP3 revolution. The MP3 delivered the world's catalog of music to everyone's computer on demand in a second. It also destroyed the music ecosystem, right?
Absolutely.
But that cost wasn't really accounted for. And people started to deliberately do inefficient stuff like buy vinyl records because it created that planned inefficiency that they needed to have texture in their lives. As AI automates and kind of turbocharges the efficiency of our economy, perhaps we will feel a need to create more what I would almost call like protected inefficient spaces like vinyl record stores or similar, because we need that. We need focal zones for interacting with other people. So in terms of how this got away from your question, I'm sorry, which is about regulation. I know I didn't really answer that, but I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the real challenge is to find a balance at the end. I'm just thinking that when somebody like Acemoglu tells you that the government should get involved, this is an economist which is in the US, okay? It's not a socialist in an emerging country telling us that the government should always be larger than it is. This is an American economist, I mean, for practical purposes, telling us This time is different because of what companies are doing, not because of Nvidia, but because of what companies, firms in all sectors are doing with this type of technologies. And we need the government to get involved and tell them what they can do and which kind of path they should follow. These are the kind of things he's saying, telling us in his last book, which is kind of, it's a provocative statement.
I will tell you what Jensen said.
Like
let me say, I want to open the conversation a little bit.
Sure. Oh yes, please. If anyone,
you can write the questions in the chat if you want. If you want, you can. Lo bueno es escribir en español las preguntas si quieren en el chat y yo las traduzco. They may write it in Spanish and I'll translate it.
Sure, I'm going to. I hope that my English is everyone can follow.
Yeah, no,
I tend to talk pretty fast.
With an AI, we can put captions too. So, well, we never know where the technology goes, right? Like maybe we'll have more jobs. I don't know. I have, while people write something if they want, I have two questions basically. You remember I said that the parallel between nuclear weapons and like these chips, but in a way, I think the big difference is that nuclear weapons were like state-owned, government-owned, right? Assets. Well, this is a key asset that is like has a lot of uses. Is private, and I was wondering how Huang feels about like the possibility that there are risks more about what humans do with this asset, right? Because it's not before governments could use nuclear weapons. Now anyone can use AI and these chips. What it requires, right? We're having surges in electricity prices. Like it seems that we're feeding a lot of things to feed these AI platforms, and also I wonder if there might be a bubble right now because in the Cold War was like the race for getting the biggest rocket, right, and the biggest bomb, and now there is like a race that is driving the huge investments that in a way will get like if Google triumphs over Meta and other companies, they drive their chips obsolete, like like in a way he's a beneficiary of this race. And so I wonder if he sees any risks related to AI in your judgment, and also like what is his final goal, right? Like because if you are everyone here, maybe if we are the richest person in the world, we're like, okay, I'm just gonna enjoy life, right? And this guy keeps working.
Jensen will never. Yeah, he's not going to step down. Yeah,
and he's not driven by money, I imagine. So what is his utopia? Sometimes, like how they say Elon Musk want to go to Mars. What is kind of his drive?
I will answer. So 3 points. I asked Jensen about the potential for large job loss. Here was his answer. He was like, look, companies are going to make more money because of AI. They're going to make more profits. And I have never seen a company make more money and not go hire people. So as we make more money, more people will be hired. That was his answer. Take it or leave it. Second, your question about the risks that somebody does something bad. So the frontier laboratories, OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, they encode safety protocols into these AIs, and they go for 3 things. They want it to be helpful. They call them 3 H's. They want it to be harmless, and they want it to be honest. And so they won't deploy it to the public until they feel that they have a helpful, harmless, honest AI. But there's the risk of a pre-production leak. There's the risk that something gets out. There's the risk ultimately that somebody jailbreaks the AI, gets around this filter, and does it to do bad stuff. I think we're going to see a great number of instances of that in the years to come. And I think there are a lot of risks there. In terms of regulation, that's the area that I most see a need for regulation. I think just as nuclear power is regulated, I think we need an independent regulatory commission that examines what AI can do. Right now, that work is done by basically a handful of nonprofits, and the frontier labs are volunteering to share this information, but they have no legal obligation to do so. And then I think that creates a big risk. And then, sorry, your last question, I just blanked out. What was the last thing you were talking about, Bernardo?
Sorry, the last thing is what was driving him.
Oh, Jensen. Yeah, what's his end game?
Yeah.
This is a great question. Jensen's end game always was that Nvidia's stock price go up. That's what motivated him. You know, he did not ever set out to be a world-conquering AI guy. It came as a surprise to him. He's exactly the opposite of Elon Musk. So Elon Musk is going to start with the idea of himself standing on the planet Mars, and then he's going to work backwards to build the technology today that he needs to get there. Jensen is totally the opposite. He's going to start with what's in front of him and ask, what's the furthest frontier that I can push this technology toward? But stuff like robotics, AI, you know, he's doing it because he sees the market there, but it's driven by the circuitry and it's driven by his need for profits. Jensen, and this is talked about a lot in the book, he's totally neurotic. He's totally driven by negative emotions. He's totally driven, and I'm not kidding, by fear. He's completely terrified that Nvidia's stock price is going to go back down, right? Like, and this has happened twice. Twice in Nvidia's history, their stock price has gone down like 90%. It's a very painful experience when that happens. Yeah. And everyone's yelling at him and trying to get him fired. He did not forget that that happened to him. He thinks about it still every day, even today. From inside the company, I have heard that when Nvidia succeeds, he actually becomes more agitated and a little bit meaner. And when times are tough, he becomes more compassionate and a nicer boss. So his biggest fear is just complacency, losing the top position. And I guarantee you, he keeps him up at night worrying about, you know, exactly the question you asked. And let's address this question. Is it a bubble? My answer is maybe. And I know that's unsatisfactory. The case that it is a bubble is I was talking to a cloud provider, a builder of AI factories yesterday that buys Nvidia microchips and builds a big data center to serve customers. And they're very aggressive in the way that they're financing this strategy. So they're funded a lot by debt, and a lot of the debt is securitized by Nvidia chips themselves, which is not a great idea because Nvidia chips depreciate in value very quickly. This is not an asset you would usually, a bank would allow you to securitize. So some of the financing is, let's say, getting a little creative, okay? And that can be risky when that happens. And I asked them sort of, you know, their whole business strategy, all of this is predicated on continuing increasing demand for AI training growth. And I asked them, well, what happens if, you know, AI growth levels off or declines? And they kind of looked at me as if I asked them, well, what happens if the sun doesn't come up tomorrow? You know, they just like, it was not something that ever occurred to them. You know what I'm saying? And so maybe this means that this looks a little iffy, a little bit like bubble conditions. But I did ask this of another executive, and he's like, no, we're not in a bubble. In fact, we're just at the beginning of a technological revolution. So far, AI has mostly trained on data like human corpus of literature, right? Books, video, that kind of thing. But there's still a universe of data that we haven't even begun to process. Real world data, the information that comes to us from the physical world that robots need to interact with the world and manipulate objects, that cars need, that industry needs to turbocharge what it's going to do. So he thinks we're in stage 1 of 4, maybe. Okay. And so he thinks we're not in a bubble, and that, you know, the stock stuff that you're seeing, the vertical kind of Nvidia stock, which is 8% of the US stock market now, is justified. And it's just the beginning of a longer term cycle in which our society is revolutionized. What's interesting is both of those things can be true, right? So the dot-com era was definitely a bubble. Nevertheless, it was the case that the internet revolutionized society. It was just the timing was off. The timing of the cash flows was off. I lived through the dot-com bubble, and I lived through the real estate bubble. And I will say, what I see in AI is not as dumb as what I saw in the dot-com bubble and the real estate bubble. The people who are fueling this are not the same kind of like low-level hucksters that you ran, kind of like scam artists. I mean, that does exist. That's out there, but not to the same extent. And the people who are driving the AI revolution are like the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. Jensen is one of the smartest people I have ever met. Jeffrey Hinton is brilliant. He won the Nobel Prize in physics. You know, that didn't happen during the real estate bubble. So, It's a tough question. What happened with railroads is they definitely transformed society. They revolutionized society. The scale of investment we're having now is similar in terms of percentage of GDP to it was during the railroad boom of the late 19th century. But there were also repeated financial panics during the railroad era. And in fact, actually, there was also a worrying thing that was very similar to what we're seeing now, a destabilizing surge of populist economic sentiment. And I'm living through this in the United States right now, and it's very concerning. Now, that was happening before AI, but I think AI has the capacity actually to turbocharge that as well and be a destabilizing political force.
Great. Hey, we have one question. You kind of answer it a little bit, but I will sum it up as this. Before there was Ford, GM, then there was I don't know, Apple, Google, like the key companies in the stock market. Do you think Nvidia is here to stay for a long run, like the key company in the market?
There's no immediate threat to their profitability. The long-term threat is from China. So I think another way of asking this question is, are we living in the Chinese century? Will China replace the US as the dominant global player? And if so, what will happen, right? So the most fascinating thing has happened for economists especially. They should study this because I don't understand the answers. Since 2009, China has industrialized at a rate that is essentially unparalleled in human history. Nothing like it has ever happened before, the rapidity of their industrialization. During that period, their stock market has been completely flat. It has not gone up at all, even though a tremendous amount of wealth has been generated in the country, that is. Now, why? Well, it's because they're run by communists, right? But they have a different economic mode that certainly, I'm telling you, Raphael doesn't like it, but it worked. In the US, we have had the opposite. We have put the shareholder first. The shareholder, the stock market comes first in the US more than any other society. And you can see that. Our stock market is up 500%, largely, as the questioner observes, through the result specifically of Nvidia, which I think is now 8% of the US stock market, which is crazy. At the same time, our society has gotten worse in many ways. And I've lived through this. There's a lot of squalor, homelessness. There's a lot of political fighting. It's not a great time to be an American, I must say. It has been a discouraging time in many ways to be an American, even as the stock market pulls away and delivers almost an unprecedented return. So I'm beginning to wonder if the stock market is even tied to the well-being of a country, which I would have taken for granted for many years, or if it's some other thing that doesn't necessarily affect the well-being of the people on the ground. So to answer your question, I think it's possible that the biggest threat to Nvidia are these unforeseen geopolitical risks now, right? China doesn't want to use Nvidia equipment. They want to build their own stack. And if they do so, that could have very bad effects for Nvidia. That's the biggest risk to them, in my opinion. Or just some kind of geopolitical conflict would be Nvidia would be caught right in the middle. It would be terrible for them.
Sorry, last question and we close that. I must ask you, how does he see, what another risk is that Donald Trump made the US a partner in the competition, right? Like now the US government owns Intel.
I don't think he's worried about Intel at all. Jensen used to be terrified of Intel. He told me this, it's in the book. It was basically like the cartoon Tom and Jerry. Intel was Tom, and they kept trying to smash Jerry the mouse, and Jensen kept running away from them, basically. He just ran away from them his entire career. Now Intel is crippled. Jensen is personally worth more than Intel now. His personal holdings in Nvidia are worth more than all of Intel. Now, Intel still has an incredible fabrication facilities, and they have the legacy, and they have a bunch of great engineers, but they are cooked. In terms of lists of things that Jensen is worried about, I would say probably Intel's pretty low on the list.
No, but I mean the US government that now is getting into this market and trying to
Yes, well, this is the thing. So I guess the question is, Trump is now extracting a certain revenue from Nvidia in a way that seems almost mercantilist, almost, or it's like something a king. It's like something a king would do. It's very corrupt.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to operate in a business environment where visibly the norms of democracy are being eroded and falling apart? So far, the stock market has, I mean, that is definitely happening, right? And not just in the US, it's actually happening around the globe, but it's especially happening now in the US. It's caught up to us. So far, that has had no effect on Nvidia's share price and no effect on the stock market. None, which is kind of amazing. But over the longer term, you must think that Trump's corrosive actions and the direction that the US is heading will ultimately have some kind of negative effect on Nvidia. You know, Jensen was never a political actor, as far as I could tell. He never made a political donation. He never endorsed a politician. He stayed out of it. But what happened is his firm got so successful that he was dragged into the middle of the biggest. It was not his intention to be here. Trust me. I guarantee you, he hates doing this. But with Trump, you know, Trump is ego-driven, and Trump wants to be around winners. And Jensen is pretty much the biggest winner that there is. So he wants Jensen close at hand. For Jensen, he's going to approach Trump the way he approaches every other problem, like an engineer. He's going to look at the inputs and outputs. He's going to say, what do I say to Trump, and how does he respond when I say this? What if I try this? And he's going to modify his inputs. He's even going to like A/B test the way that he talks to Trump. And then he's going to see how Trump responds. And I think initially he was unsuccessful with Trump, right? Initially, Trump would not lift the restriction on selling his chips to China. But he kept working on him, and eventually he got Trump to reverse course. So we'll see how that relationship evolves. I can't think of a more clown-like relationship. It would almost be like a comedy duo. I mean, they have a certain similarity in that they're both quite blustery and they talk loud, etc. And they're funny. They like to joke around, both of them. They're crack jokes. But Trump is the least rational person. He does not operate from first principles. You know, he doesn't reason forward in the way that Jensen does. He's very kind of emotional and reactive. And Jensen's the opposite, right? He's totally logical. So to put them together in the same room, I almost can't even imagine how they would interact.
Bernardo, let me ask you just one final question, very short. Because I mean, I think it's in the last chapter of the book. Maybe it's not in the last one, but you tell the story about what happened. It has, I mean, it's connected to the first question of Bernardo. And you said that when you asked him about the dangers of AI, not only he didn't, I mean, answer, but he kind of exploded in anger. I think
he started yelling.
Something like that. Yeah. So my question is, after that, do you sleep well, or you are really alarmed? I mean,
I'm still alarmed. So I'm writing about this. I'm still alarmed because the biggest risk, as I have identified it, is not so much that the AI becomes super intelligent, but that it develops some kind of survival instinct. It doesn't need to be super intelligent to be dangerous. It just has to not want to die. It just has to not want to be turned off. And we're entering the age of AI agents, where AIs will go out and perform real-world actions for us, right? They'll go and accomplish things in the real world. And if someone gives it a bad prompt as an agent, like take over the planet or, you know, eliminate all human life, how will the AI respond? And believe it or not, some crazy person is going to ask it that. Some person with a weird doomsday person, I mean, just the same reason we have school shooters and maniacs. Some maniac is going to get into the AI's agency and just give it a ton of bad prompts. I don't think the safeguard protocols that currently exist are good enough to protect against this. I don't think it's a doomsday scenario. I think we can fix this problem, but I do not think we have fixed it yet. And that has me worried.
Okay. Hey, this was a lot of fun. I think we can talk about this all day. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Rafael. I'll send you the link, and thank you, everyone, for coming. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. It was a great talk.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye. Good luck. Bye. Thanks.